Welcome to Nextcasts, where we take you on a thrilling journey into the heart of innovation, urban development, and the future of our bustling cities. I'm your host, Emilia, CEO of Swissnex in San Francisco, and this is the METROPOLIS season. Good afternoon, Arabelle.
Hi, Emilia.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Thanks for
Welcome
inviting me.
We're very excited to have you, and thank you for accepting the invitation at our podcast Nextcasts, the anniversary session of Swissnex. Let's start with the first question. Tell us who you are.
So, I'm thrilled to participate in this podcast. So I am from Geneva. I have a background in civil engineering, and I worked a couple of years in industry, in the construction sector. And through these experiences, I developed a strong interest in sustainability in the built environment. And this led me to my current position at ETH, at the chair of Circular Engineering for Architecture, the CEA, headed by Catherine de Wolf. And so this is where I work now, and I work at the interface between research, innovation, academia, and industry. And our activities focus on digital technologies for our circular economy in the construction sector.
Okay. Before going into your work, I'm just curious to hear a little bit more about, you mentioned Professor Catherine de Wolf, who is a renowned expert also in this area, and yourself. So many women in the construction sectors. Is this a new trend? Is this a normality nowadays, or still a topic we need to address as well?
It's unfortunately not really a normality, I would say, even if it's improving a lot. But in our work, we are at the interface between various disciplines, so architecture, engineering, and computer science. So maybe as we are linked to also the architecture environment, it is a bit more diverse.
More diverse, okay, thanks. So tell us more about your work at ETH. You started by telling us of the circular engineering for architecture, about this center. What is it exactly? Because there are a lot of words in this, in just in the name of the institute.
Yes, so at the CEA, our research aims to contribute to moving away from a linear economy. So a linear economy follows a take, make, waste model, which means that we first extract resources, then we produce building components that are built, and then when the building is no longer in use, it becomes waste after it's being demolished. And this model demonstrated its enormous impact on the environment, and this is why we want to shift to circular model in construction. And so this can be done in different ways. So following the four main concepts or loops of circular economy. So there's the slowing loop, where we use less resources. Start again. There's the slowing loop, where we use resources longer. Then the narrowing loop, where we use less resources. The regeneration loop, where we want to restore and even improve natural processes through construction activity. And then the closing circular loop, where we want to reuse instead of eliminate resources at the end of their first life. So reuse is not only about recycling, which is also great for resource conservation, but still requires energy and carbon intensive processes. So we really put reuse at the center of our work. And it's a practice that is actually already applied. So for example, We can reuse doors or floorings or even structural elements from old buildings that are disassembled into new ones. But it's still a very big challenge to scale this practice because it requires completely new ways of functioning. So, for example, we need a lot of data on the building components, and also it's a bit challenging because of the very long lifespan of buildings. So buildings usually last 50 or even 100 years. So there's a big uncertainty on what's built. So we need new ways of exchanging, of connecting supply and demand. And also a lot of logistics is requires. We need new ways of disassembling buildings. We can no longer go with the wrecking ball if we want to reuse elements. And so this creates a completely new part on the value chain of building components.
Does that mean that you say we need new way, the wrecking ball is not a solution anymore, so it means that when we used to tear down a building, it is a process now, but it's kind of I was about to say an easy process, which is probably not, but your point is also to say that disassembling the building, we really need a clearer process of knowing exactly what is in the building, what can be reused. So this type of things, that we have a clearer process, that it takes longer, that we really analyze the building before.
Yes, exactly. So if we want to reuse elements, we need to check existing buildings that will be disassembled, and first to assess what can be reused. Sometimes we cannot reuse elements because of various reasons, but then the construction methods applied back then on buildings that we currently use we're usually not following the design for disassembly principles that we try to adopt now in new constructions. So it means that it's quite difficult to separate the elements from each other. So for example, if we want to separate a window from the wall, sometimes it's glued, it's not really possible to make a clear cut and to really separate these elements so that they can be both reused or reused in different projects and so on.
Can I ask you one thing about the difference, because you touched upon that just earlier, between recycling and reusing? Yeah. Because when I hear when I hear, well, we just take this window and we're reusing it in another building. So my understanding is not very different from recycling it somehow, but it's not exactly the same, or?
It's not exactly the same. So if we consider a window, for example, we can recycle the glass. So we would break the glass in little pieces and then melt it again in order to produce a new window, or a bottle. It can also be recycled into something else. And this is a good way to preserve the resources, but it requires a lot of processes. And these processes also are carbon intensive, need energy and so on. But if we reuse the window, for example, we would take it as it is and place it in another building. And environmentally speaking, the footprint is much lower because it may need a little bit of transportation, maybe, or remanufacturing, but we don't need to go all the way from extracting new resources, producing new elements, and so on.
Okay. Could you tell us more about so you talked about the general work at ETH, but there is also a special project that you will present for the anniversary of Swissnex.
Yes. So in our group, our work is dedicated to actually developing new technologies or using existing digital technologies that are applied to the construction sector to actually facilitate the processes around reuse. So, for example, to mention a few projects that my colleagues are working on, we work on digital technologies for storage of information, for example, on these building components, or on digital methods to track and trace the elements between their different lives. Automated generation of data sets on building components. And then the idea is that we can have information on a beam, for example, once from when it's inside of a first building. And then we can, for example, if it's reused, track it throughout the phases, so transportation, storage, and so on. And then we can still access this information when it's in the new building, and we can also update them digitally.
So each construction part is tracked from the beginning and then in the new building, and then how it can be reused.
Yes, exactly. This would be the idea, that we can access very easily and digitally the information on these elements, so that we can reuse them, so that we can also communicate between sellers and buyers, so that the construction companies knows what they will receive on site, for example. And these information now are still not really available, and this makes the whole reuse process very complicated, actually. And it still requires a lot of human labor and phone calls and very complicated processes prevent the scale of this practice, unfortunately. So this.
Okay, and in your project, instead of having because it's automated, so instead of having, you don't have someone going to a building that is going to tear down saying, okay, there are like two beams, but you can, how does that work? You have
in our research group in general, we work on the development of various technologies that can help all of the processes throughout the value chain of reuse. So the management of information is one part, for example. Then we would have the tracking and tracing that can be also supported digitally, for example, with devices using QR codes in order to keep track of the elements. But then we also work on other types of technologies, for example, in order to understand what's inside of a building based on pictures or on other data sources. So we really investigate in parallel different of these technologies. But this is where my project comes to the game. So because we often notice that these technologies cannot really be adopted easily in the construction industry because they are based on new ways of functioning, new ways of exchanging information, of communicating. It also requires a new expertise for circular construction. So there are many barriers, but also it's not only a matter of technical issues. The business opportunities, I would say, haven't been clearly identified around circular construction. So, for example, now it's still much more expensive to reuse elements than to buy the same ones but new. And it also requires somehow business model innovation to understand how we can generate value for all of these actors. And there are other big issues, for example, also the legal aspect. So, for example, in Europe or in Switzerland, there are regulations on products where the product performances are documented in declarations for new products, but for reuse ones, this doesn't exist. And there is also a whole gray zone in the law. So no one really wants to take responsibility for it. So
for something that they haven't bought and that
Exactly,
is
yeah.
not new, because there is of course a bigger
So
risk.
yeah, in a nutshell, it's not only a technical issue, but it's really a transdisciplinary challenge that we want to address. And so in this project, we investigate how we can bring this transdisciplinary challenge in order to create a systemic change, because we feel like it's not only the adoption of one technology, but it's an entire systemic change that is required, boosted by digital technologies, and that can be used across different functions and services, for example. So this is how we came up with this concept of a digital ecosystem for circular construction. So the idea of the digital ecosystem, it's not only to create a platform to exchange goods and service, but it goes further. So, for example, one example of a digital ecosystem would be Apple. So Apple, they created an entire concept providing a structure where we can access apps through various devices. And in this structure, there are billions of users, millions of apps that are being integrated and developed. And now every company feels like they have to be part of this ecosystem. So they work with developers that are not part of Apple, but external ones, to create their apps so that they can also be connected to the users and to all stakeholders as part of a digital ecosystem. And this is also based on standardization so that we can access this Apple ecosystem with an iPhone, with an iPad, with a watch, and so on. So this is an example of a new way to be connected and to enable all stakeholders to communicate together.
Could we say that you would be something like the Facebook of construction, where you could have Facebook Market as well. You could buy old beams that are not too far from when you want to do your construction, and then you could develop a new app on this construction Facebook.
This is
something like
the idea, so that we really develop a new digital ecosystem where, such as Facebook, we can communicate, exchange goods and services, have a marketplace, but also use standardized methods so that it works. Because if one person sells a beam but only documents the weight and the next one needs the length of the beam, then we have a problem. So this is why in this ecosystem project, we also work with many stakeholders from industry and research and from all of these disciplines together to first establish new foundations. So how can we create these standards for circular construction? Which data do we need to exchange goods and services, to transport reused elements, to design a new building based on elements that will be available for reuse and so on. So we want to establish these new foundations, and then we can build on top of that to develop new technologies, new business models, a legal framework, and so on.
Do you work closely with the industry?
Yes, so in this project, we have many industry partners and research partners, because it's a mix of various disciplines. And so we work in this project mostly with the Swiss case. So we have mostly Swiss industry partners, also from different fields. So we work with startups, with real estate owners, with consultants, with construction companies, and so on. So many different stakeholders of the construction industry, which makes it very interesting because we can actually represent the Swiss value chain and have these actors that contribute to all parts of building life cycle.
And what is the feedback of the industry so far?
This is a good question.
Difficult
I think
question.
Many industry partners agree that we need more standardized ways of working together. There's a lot of interest for circular construction and for reuse, and there are many initiatives that are being developed, but they are all quite isolated and they don't communicate with each other. And for example, in Switzerland, there are various marketplaces, online marketplaces specialized on reused elements. But there's no way to access the information on all marketplaces at the same time. So, for example, if you need 50 doors for a new building, maybe you can check on one website if you can find 3 of them, and on the next marketplace, maybe you would have 5 more, and so on. So it makes the process also quite complicated.
It works probably for individuals. I'm thinking of my dad, who is doing a lot of renovations for houses. And he buys a lot on like those, those websites, eBay and something like that. But it's true that it's okay if you have 1 door. If you need 50 doors, it's more complicated.
Yeah, if you need 50 doors, it's more complicated. But there are also other construction companies or consultant companies specialized on that. And they developed actually a new discipline that in German it's called Bauteilejäger. So it's a hunter for building components. And now it became a job to really go and check buildings that will be disassembled in the near future in order to create a database and or maybe directly to take some of the components and store them for the buildings that will be built also in the near future.
So digitalization destroys some jobs, but definitely creates new ones.
This job for now is not really based on digital technologies, but we see the importance of also digital technologies to really scale the process, because this works for isolated projects or for a few projects or within a portfolio, for example. But of course, if we manage to develop technologies that can directly do that, then it provides a lot more information so that every architect, every engineer, for example, can have a better idea on what could be available and integrate it in their project.
What is the feedback of the architect to your project?
I think the feedback is also quite positive. Many architects are really interested, but it's very difficult now in early phases, for example, to be able to predict what's going to be available. So for the architecture discipline, I think it's still a big challenge to design a new building without knowing if we can reuse something or not. There are examples where it worked well, but they probably have to face some uncertainty and then to design again and again and again based on what's there. And also in this...
Do they like this? Do they like this? Because it's a restriction somehow. My ex-boyfriend was an architect, and I think he wouldn't have had to be told which window he should use for this building. So I was wondering if you had this type of discussion.
Well, of course, for the creativity, it's a barrier, but you can also see it as a constraint where you build around it. So I think I've worked with architects that were really interested in that, and probably for others it makes less sense. But there are also different ways of applying reuse in construction. You can, for example, show it very obviously in a building with different windows, different doors that have different sizes. But there are also examples of buildings with reuse where you don't even see it because the elements have standardized sizes, they are painted again. For example, if you consider a steel structure, the steel profiles are very standardized, so you would not really know if they were reused or not.
Or not. And could you talk to us a little bit about the field in general, the field of circular construction? Is this booming? Is it something that is particular in Switzerland?
It's definitely booming, which is good. Because the construction industry has such a big footprint, so we feel like we really need new solutions now. It accounts for 40% of CO2 emissions, for example, worldwide, and also a third of resource extraction or waste generation, and even much more in Switzerland. So there's a very urgent need for new solutions. And in the recent years or decades, there was a lot of effort to improve, for example, the energy efficiency of buildings and to reduce the heating demand and so on. And there are very good examples of that right now. But the problem we address with circular construction is really the so-called embodied energy, so the impact related to the building materials themselves. And for now, we don't really have very good solutions for that. There are, of course, materials that are better than others, but still every new building has a very, very big footprint. And this is where we see circular construction as a solution for the future. So one aspect of circular construction is reuse, but there are also other aspects that target, for example, the flexibility of buildings so that they can be used as well as an office building, but also as a housing building, so that they can stay much longer. Also flexibility inside of a building so that you can create bigger or smaller apartments depending on the needs, so that you don't need to demolish the building too early because a new one is required and so on. So there are different ways of applying circular strategies to construction.
And if we zoom out from like the pure project and construction now, and thinking about the future of cities in a broader context, what would be your vision of our future city?
Well, it's not an easy question because I think there's so much diversity in urbanization, so it's difficult to generalize it. But I think my wish would be that urbanizations can operate in greater harmony with nature, and this is actually also the idea of the concept of regeneration. That is one of the 4 loops in circular economy, where we can place nature at the center and humans leave a positive impact on it through their activities. It can be related to the ways to, for example, the use of bio-based materials, to the integration of vegetation into a building, also to the water use of the building, so that it has a positive effect on, for example, soils, at the location of the building and so on.
Is it really possible to have to close the loop in term of resources? Is it really possible?
In the theory of circular economy, yes, it is. The idea is that you reuse resources as long as possible, and then you give the biological waste back to the environment, and then it really creates a closed system. But of course, in reality, resource depletion is an issue, a very big one, and it requires a lot of technical innovations, organizational change, so that we can really close the systems.
And if we come back to the utopia we were discussing, what do you see as one of the biggest challenge for this future city that you were describing?
Well, I think a big challenge in general in the field of sustainability is to not adopt this so-called carbon tunnel vision also. Of course, environmental sustainability is very important, and it's urgent to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But we also need social sustainability, economic sustainability, also at the city scale, so that we can really create systems that work and that bring well-being to all stakeholders. So I think this is a big issue because nowadays we talk a lot about CO2, carbon emission, carbon or net zero neutrality strategies and so on. But sometimes we forget a bit about other global issues, about inequalities, about conflicts when we address the climate crisis. So I think it's important to also keep this very open general view on sustainability challenges.
And maybe for the people listening to this podcast with your expertise, so what everyday change could people implement to contribute to a more sustainable urban future?
For example, we can rethink ways of living a little bit. If we have, 10% less surface per person, in theory, we could also reduce the amount of buildings drastically, and this would play a big difference. So we can rethink how we would like to live, and also with the COVID crisis, it showed a lot of interest for alternative ways. Now we work from home, we use transportation less. There were entire campuses that were left completely empty, a lot of urban space that could be used alternatively. And so I think here there's a lot of potential that would actually induce minor changes to the way we live. And I think it's tricky for individuals to really know how to make the right decision sometimes. For example, if you want to check a flight, how much greenhouse gas emissions it will induce, there are many calculators that are available online, but you can really find huge ranges of values from simple to triple for the same flight. And so it is very difficult to know the impact of individual decisions. So this is why I also sometimes understand that we don't all follow the right way, because if we cannot really measure it, how can we manage it?
Of course, of course. it's not one tip, it's a full program that we have.
Exactly.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Arabelle. So we're about to close this Nextcast edition with you, Arabelle. Thank you so much for participating in this podcast.
Thank you very much, Emilia, and have a great day.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye. This episode was part of the METROPOLIS season, where we celebrate Swissnex in San Francisco's 20th anniversary. Find out more about the anniversary and upcoming events by Swissnex in San Francisco in the show notes. Stay tuned for the next episode and see you at one of our upcoming events.